on this computer. All right, we're back with a new Dungeons and Dragons scholar, Pepperina Sparkle Gem.
The Queen of Dragons. We can't forget her title.
Look at all the dragons.
There they are.
He has more dragons than anybody else I know.
I recently counted. There's about 100.
Oh, and you painted them all, right?
Most of them.
Most of them, with the exception of the big Tiamat.
I did paint the Bones Tiamat. That's over there too.
Oh, I have the Bones Tiamat.
So I have two Tiamats.
Right there, I have the Bones Tiamat right on the shelf there. If I could poke at it, and he or she, sorry, was painted by a very dear friend, the War Mistress.
Yes, I remember that. She and I got the Tiamats at the same time. They were painted like pretty much at the same time because we were like looking at them on Instagram.
She was doing it while I was in the hospital, and she was very meticulous and very particular with how it came out. She kept messaging me and saying, you know, it's not coming out the way I want it. It's not coming out the way I want it. And when she sent it to me, I'm like, what is not the way you want it? It is incredible. And she's just like, it could have been better.
It was gorgeous. I remember that one well. Yeah.
Some people are what's the word? Kind of perfectionists, you know.
Absolutely.
We're most critical on ourselves for sure.
And
you get an idea in your head as like an artist, and if it's not coming out, even though it looks really good to somebody else, you're like, but it's not what was in my head.
See, on the other hand, as someone who does not paint at all, I'm just appreciative if someone is like, here, I'll paint your minis. And I'll be like, please take them all. And I will pay you this money.
Yeah, we just added somebody new to our home game, and he is very appreciative to the point where he's like, I will paint anything you want. He's a very good painter. And I'm like, just play and roll some dice, man.
Yeah. That's all that matters at the end of the day.
Yes. So today we are meeting to discuss a topic that I think we're going to revisit a few times in the future because it is a very complicated topic. And it is something that I think I get a lot of questions about. I get a lot of DMs who send me questions. I really want to do X to my players. How do I do it? And how do I foil all of their attempts to, there goes my daughter running in the background. How do I foil their attempts to ruin my storyline, which is a whole nother topic for another day. But today we're going to talk about encounter design. And it is actually more complicated, I think, than most people realize, because it's not all encounters are created equal, and not all groups are up for the challenge of the most complicated, laid plans of the evilest DM twisting their mustache. You know, we sometimes, oh, there he goes down there. Sometimes you need to assess your group and give them the room to grow before you unleash the 5 elder red dragons that all, you know, spawn from different corners of the room to breathe fire simultaneously on the group, which was an encounter I had back in the not my encounter. It was a guy who was running a game and he had never DM'd before, and we were killed within the first 5 minutes of the game, and that's fine too.
Yeah, that's a way to go.
We all have to learn sometimes, including DMs. So Pepperina is gonna. I always forget my camera's, you know, the reverse of what I had anticipated.
I'm somewhere.
She's over there.
In the ethereal plane, Pep is here.
Yeah.
Brian is below me there. the big thing I found, and I want to start at the most basic level, because you do have to consider your group, and you do have to consider, you know, skill level of the players, as well as, you know, there are some groups that are going to take the game much more serious, whereas some groups are going to be more casual. So all of these things have to be brought together in your considerations. But Pepperina, you have a very extraordinary case, something I have a lot of experience with, because I started my children at 5 years old when they started gaming. And so why don't you talk about how you set up encounters for your kids,
right? So
all the things you think about.
My kids are currently 10 and 12, so they've been playing. We've had our family game for a couple of years now, so a lot of time I keep it very whimsical with my kids. A lot of times what I will do, because I've built so many little pieces of terrain for Joe at Encounter Terrain, his 10 by 10 challenges.
Okay.
And I will build that for whatever theme he comes up with, and then I will come up with a story to go with it and an encounter for the kids. So I made one, it was the theme was for the gods, and I built a dice shaped room, and it was a shrine to the dice gods. So this is the most recent one that I did for my kids. And it had a little pedestal in the middle, and it had a dice goblin that was the keeper of the shrine. And I made 2 dice golems where I took dice and glued them together so they were golems. And it was like a Indiana Jones type dungeon. So everything in there had to do with numbers. It had to do with dice, and they had to make their way through and figure out all these puzzles and traps and things based on dice. And one of the rooms was, it had random weapons in it and random dice. So it was whatever weapon did like a D8 damage had to go on a pedestal together.
That's legit.
So it was them trying to figure out like which ones did which damage, and I gave them hints in other rooms. Like in the first room there was 4 statues with daggers, so that's your D4 worth of damage.
Yeah.
So the hints were throughout the whole dungeon for that last.
So they're learning the game at the same time.
Yeah. So that's typically how I do it, because I come up with all these pieces of terrain, and my husband's like, we have all these little pieces of terrain and nothing to do with them, and I'm like, I'm gonna use them. So I come up with encounters based on the things I do for those themes for my kids, and I just try to tie in things that they like there was one I did, it was a dragon in a kitchen that was baking. So I made that when we were all stuck at home in quarantine for Thanksgiving, because we all had COVID, I made that a Thanksgiving themed game where they had to help the dragon. It was a brass dragon. They had to help the dragon save Thanksgiving. So she sent them out on a mission, and they had to go through, my daughter has her favorite stuffed animal. It's a little brown lab puppy dog, and she calls it Mrs. Mommy Puppy Dog. So one of the places they went through was Mrs. Mommy Puppy Dog Forest, and that's where all puppy dogs come from, is this forest. So it's taking in the things that they like and tying it into the game, and they still remember those things even though it was, a year ago, and they'll still ask like, can we go back to that puppy dog forest?
Nice. I like it a lot. So have you ever encountered a situation where what you planned turned out to be a little too much or a little too easy, and you've had to give it a twist in mid-encounter?
Yeah, actually, with that puppy dog forest one, I just sort of had that as the name. And as they were walking through it is when I had the idea, like, I think this is where all dogs are going to come from. And so all of a sudden they were like surrounded by eyes and and the shadows and stuff. And they didn't know what to do. And it turned out it was just a bunch of puppies that came and like jumped at him and gave him kisses and stuff. But it's definitely like, okay, I have this and I don't know what to do with it, but mid-game, you got to come up with something. So,
I oftentimes will scale an encounter just on the fly, because like there's nothing worse than like planning a say like a puzzle or a riddle that they have to solve, and then like an hour goes by, they haven't got it. An hour and a half goes by and they haven't got it. And it's like, you don't want everyone they came over and they're going to sit there for 5 hours or whatever trying to figure out this thing. Or even, the dice gods just did not smile on the party that day. And the orcs are giving what should have been like an average encounter is turning into Custer's Last Stand, and there's many times I've had to like be like, I don't want my campaign to end on a orc encounter. So, you kind of give the orcs a little bit of a disadvantage all of a sudden. And it sounds like for your kids, you got a lot of like atmosphere and role playing as opposed to dice rolling. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely dice rolling, but it's a lot of them figuring out things and just enjoying where they're at and what they're seeing and the magic of the game. Versus it being so like, here's a fight, I'm gonna roll these dice for an hour. It's the wonder, it's the mystery, it's the whimsy of the game that I try to really give them in their imaginations, because kids have such great imaginations.
Yeah.
If it's just rolling a dice and adding numbers, they're going to get bored really quick. Like, you got to really tap into that kind of stuff. And
Brian, do you have any experience running games for kids?
Actually, I do not. I do not have any experience running games for kids. I would like to gain more experience in it, but unfortunately, I do not. So what I do normally for my players, and it's something Pep mentioned, is focus on what they like. If your players are all about hack and slash, run them through dungeon crawls. Just, even get some of those old school, I think it's called old school dungeons, and it's just dungeon crawls for 5th edition. If your players like role play, just have role play. Right now, my in-person group, they love role play. They don't care about combat necessarily. They just love role play. So I give them role play. Every now and then we do have a combat, because times of role play that I don't want to say fail, but times where the NPC, because this NPC is not necessarily a talkative individual, they're gonna get into an argument, altercation, and then now you're rolling initiative. My virtual group's kind of in the middle, so it's just dependent upon the group. I mean, Pep and I play in the same world of Evermore, and I think we could say like our group that her and I are in, I would say we're very role play like based.
I think 3 months in that game without rolling a single dice before.
Yeah, same here. Like, and we,
yeah,
I mean,
every
actually,
week.
Yeah, we play every week, and actually, this past week was one of the big combats that we had ever since. Was it March?
Yeah.
Or 8? It was when Dane turned 69 years older because he aged. Yeah. So there was an encounter, a combat encounter that was way, like, I think it was a CR 30. If I'm doing the numbers correctly, it was probably a CR30, and it was one of the other characters in the group, King Arvid and his honor guard, and they pretty much all got wiped except for King Arvid, and I managed to get there on time, and suffer the repercussions of it. But that was one of those things that in an encounter that mostly, or for a group that mostly does role play, that was a big combat. So it, like, Ray was able to equalize it, right? We do a lot of role play, but we're gonna have a really big combat encounter to make the playing field a little bit equal. And
one thing Ray does not do is, like, he doesn't, if you're a level 1 and you decide to go somewhere and it has a level 30, he's not going to scale that down to a level 1 for you. Like, you got to figure it out, or you got to figure out you got to run. So with that particular encounter, like you said, King Arvid got there first, and he was alone, and he was not very high level.
No, he was level.
This is why you don't split the party.
Yeah, that's true.
He did not know that this was going to be a monster when he set off to, like, talk to another king. But then Brian's character came, and then I got a message from Brian's character, and 3 of us came to save them. And I don't think we actually did any damage to this monster, but we all made it out alive.
Yep.
And we were all shocked we made it out alive. It was very much talking to each other. What this encounter taught us is to talk to each other, to read our character sheets, and to work with each other's strengths. So I knew that Brian's character could throw up this aura to stop him, but in case that didn't work, I'm a monk. I can take away his reaction. So let me hit him first. You hit him. We'll run past. Another guy teleported the king out of there to save him. And then another guy threw up a ward. Or no, he came in with an airship and blew the whole thing up as we ran out. So it very much taught us as a team that we know we can't defeat this thing. There's no way. No. We will all die. So what else can we do? Yeah. What do you got? What do you have going on for your character? What are your strengths? What can we pull in?
And that is another aspect of encounter design is, I know I have run for groups that believe that if the DM has thrown an encounter at us, it must mean that we can win. Mm-hmm. They don't understand that sometimes surviving is the win. And so that is a whole nother kind of encounter. I want to come back to that, though, because I want to circle back to the kids aspect, because I ran for a few years at a game store. I ran a Saturday morning kids game, and kids, and the reason I want to discuss this because when I'm planning my encounters, if you're working with adults, you are probably thinking, these are all adults, they're going to get along and they're going to cooperate. I had a table of 7 early teenage kids, 12, 13, and I didn't know this beforehand, but they had all gotten in an argument, and one of the kids, who happened to be the cleric of the party, was kind of ganged up on by the others because they all got angry at him. I don't even know why. They all got angry with him. So when they sat down at the table, there was this little grudge being held. Oh no. And the cleric.
Never single out the cleric, man.
Well, the cleric was the one that was held the grudge. And they were going into this, we were running War of the Dragon Queen, and they were going in and fighting the white dragon that's up north. And cleric just decided, I'm not healing, not doing it. And the first player went down and died. The second player went down and died. And I'm looking at I'm looking at him who's playing the cleric, and I'm like, what is going on? Why are you acting this way? And
so you didn't know about the grudge beforehand?
No. And So at about the third player death, I stopped everything. I said, I don't know what's going on, but we need to stop and rewind. And I talked to the kids about, you know, what it is, what is meant to be a party of adventurers who have each other's back. And then I circled back to them personally, and I said, you know, I understand that something happened, but I think what we need to do is restart this encounter like none of this had ever happened. And we'll start from round one where everyone was when everyone started out. So it's sometimes I think a DM, especially if you're dealing with kids, which is why I kind of wanted to start there. Sometimes you got to be willing to roll back the clock when there's what's the word I'm looking for, kind of unforeseen circumstances that are affecting gameplay. You know, I still remember that day and kind of giving them a little bit of a stern talking to, just a little bit of a stern, and then turning it into, come on, let's all put this behind us. And then they handled the encounter with flying colors. But it was, I think when you're dealing with kids and running the game, and particularly when because you know, it's devastating for a kid for their character to die, you know.
Yeah.
And to have see the look on their faces when I'm like taking out these, and the cleric is literally standing as far away from the encounter as possible with his arms like this, you know. And in fact, I think he used somehow the cleric had the minor illusion cantrip, and he made a really big version of him crossing his arms like this. And so I knew something.
Yep.
You know.
Yeah.
So if we graduate now to kind of a level up from that, which for me is kind of casual players. Like if we just take the kid equation out and you have casual players, I run a game on Monday nights. Half the table have never played before. You know, I think there might be one or two really hardcore players, but aside from that, it's like people trying to figure out if they like Dungeons and Dragons or not, which apparently they do because they've been back every week. Everyone
always comes back.
That's true.
We've had very few that don't come back.
You ain't lying.
So one of the things I do in those cases, you know, if we start at the top, if we look at the top tier of gaming groups, you know, you're looking at people who have played extensively. They know their characters inside and out. They are hardcore when it comes to whether it's, you know, min-maxing or role playing or whatever. They know what they need to do and they know how to work as a group, you know, and the DM has to work to give them a challenge. You know, that is like a 10 out of 10, right? On the difficulty. Whereas the casual player, you're down around the 3 out of 10, right, on difficulty scale, because, you know, I have players who maybe have played for a year plus. They've maybe played, but they just don't pay attention, you know, to like we had a guy at the table. He's played 5th edition plenty of times. He's played a rogue plenty of times, but he forgets to sneak attack, or he forgets to, he just will go off on his own and do his own thing, and it won't even cross his mind that it's hurting the party, you know. And so in those circumstances, when I design an encounter, I kind of make it a little bit more upfront and kind of a club over the head as opposed to a stab in the back. You know, I don't try to make it overly complicated because I know for a fact that I could design an on the CR encounter that would just stomp the heck out of these guys. But, you know, that's not going to be a lot of fun for just an open table with a bunch of casual players. So I don't know if either of you guys have an experience with that level of play, but you know, Brian, what do you think? I talked to Pepperina the first time last time.
So this is the thing. The first group of players that played in my homebrew world that started the golden age of heroes in the lands of Ecopia were a ragtag group of lovable buffoons. And that's what they called themselves. They were lovable buffoons. They never played D&D. They never played a tabletop role-playing game. They've always played Warcraft, or they played Diablo, things of that nature. So I had to kind of transition them from something that an algorithm spoon-fed them in the sense of a raid boss, or wild hogs in the forest, as South Park made fun of, into, okay, like my world, very much so, if you are a level 1 adventurer and you so happen to run into a den of X creature, I mean, it's not my fault, it's just that's where they live in the world. But I had to kind of readjust. I had to say, okay, kind of like what you said, or what you stated, of you can't kind of slip them the knife behind the back, you have to hit them with the club. That's what I learned to do. I learned to say, okay, what's in the monster manual that I can take, and it's a kind of a clunk over the head, but I can make it fun. So I started thinking, how would a goblin, right, a group of goblins that are pretty low CR, they're pretty easy to fight off, what would happen if I made them a little bit smarter? What would happen if I made them intelligent enough to attack with a certain stratagem? So I started kind of attacking the cleric, right? The person that the goblins see using this magic and healing them, and saying, oh, we now need to attack that person because they are making these other people healthier, and we're trying to eliminate them from our home. Because I always like to place the trope of and I think we spoke about this last time, Matt, where I had adventurers, that same group, go into the goblin cave and eliminate all these goblins, even after using these tactics, right? And now there's goblin women and children. So that's another topic for another day. But from a combat perspective, like, I try to think how I'm thinking in a way that makes sense to me. So that's what I would say. I would challenge people, if you're trying to decipher anything, really, try to think like, as a dungeon master, you're also a player. Like, that's my personal opinion. I think, like, just because you're facilitating the world doesn't mean that you can't play, so to speak, right? It doesn't mean that you can't take that creature and when you're designing your encounter, to think outside of the box. Because let's be honest, it'd be great to come up with an epic level CR, 30 whatever, but do you have the time to prep for that? So instead, just get a monster from the monster manual and start thinking differently. Matt Colville has a really good video on that, so I recommend that too. But sorry, I can go into a tangent about this because I'm really passionate about like combat encounters, and specifically like catering it to a way that's more war gamey than it is role play. That's just me.
You have a my mind just went off a tangent because I started thinking about Pepperina's puzzles and riddles.
Yeah.
But do you have, either of you guys have a favorite source of inspiration for puzzles and traps or riddles?
Depends on my players.
Mine is actually the community. I always reach out to people and ask. I'm like, I have this idea for a dungeon or something, and this is the theme of it. Do you have any ideas for puzzles? And what have you done? And I'm big on the Initiative Order Discord, and they are fantastic. It's a fantastic group of people that do all sorts of things in the tabletop community. So even people who maybe don't play D&D but play Cyberpunk, or play Alien or play Call of Cthulhu will have a different perspective on a clue or a riddle or a puzzle from a different game and a different system. So I've been more recently trying to pull in from different things like that. Like just 2 days ago, I ran a Call of Cthulhu game for the second time ever. For adults and not my kids. So that was my second time ever DMing actual adults.
You don't want to expose your kids to Lovecraftian horror?
Not just yet.
What?
Not just yet.
No.
I mean, my son's almost 13, so maybe soon. But I try to, this community, the tabletop community on Instagram and Discord is so huge and so vast that I really try to pull on them.
And they're actually, and they're way, I shouldn't say it. I just like the IG Discord community for TTRPGs versus other platforms personally. Because my inspiration, okay, when it comes to like terrain, right? If I want to make, because I've spoken about this a lot. I think of combat encounters from different angles. Why can't you use the terrain around you? Why can't you use the environment, right? If I don't know, if the party is in the mountains, right, and there's snow, kind of like the passive Garhadras in Lord of the Rings, they see, you know, the wind is howling and the snow, there's that, you know, blizzard, so to speak. That's a combat encounter, in my opinion. You can't fight the enemy, but it's a sort of encounter. You have to fight something. And that's what I utilize, right? And I utilize that wind where they can't see. I think it was the Adventures in Middle Earth for 5th edition. I think it's been out of print now, but that had a really great combat encounters that I found inspiration in, right? So if you were in a swamp, why can't the players have difficult terrain applied to them if they're fighting in a swamp? So I take inspiration from other TTRPGs. I take inspiration from those in the community. So like I'll see something that Jay from Jay's Tabletop Terrain or Ray from GotDM in their terrain builds, and I say, "Ooh, that looks really good." And I think it's worthy of like incorporating that into my campaign, whether it's a dungeon or whatever it may be. I mean, there have been times where, you know, Pep and Chad have been talking about their game, and I'm like, ooh, you know, that's a really good inspiration. Like without even asking, I was like, oh, that is perfect. Like for something and then obviously I ask later to borrow it, but it's like I think it's leaning on each other, lean on the people that are in your community. And if you're not involved in Discord or Instagram community just yet, like if you haven't been well established, right? Like if you just found us, welcome. But you know, if you just found us, like go to your local game store, look for that inspiration, because I find inspiration there too. Because I find other DMs and GMs and say, hey, what are you doing? Like, look, like, oh, you're playing Mordheim. Cool. Can I jump in and play? And then I gain inspiration from that. So playing other TTRPGs, that's a really big thing too. Like I think just like reading books is inspiration for DMs and players from a storytelling perspective, I think playing games, diving into the community, things of that nature, as DMs, we can gain inspiration for encounters.
I actually just, the group that we played Call of Cthulhu with, after that session, because we're all D&D players, for most of them, 2 of the guys, it was their second time playing because they were the first time that I DM'd it or was the keeper for it. And the other 3 players, it was their first time. So afterwards, they had so much fun with it and learning a new thing and taking inspiration from that system and different things. Like the sanity aspect of that is amazing in the Call of Cthulhu game. And we decided that this group specifically is going to just learn new games so that we can take that to our D&D games. So that's just like every month we're going to meet and play a different game.
Yeah, and absolutely the from encounter design's perspective, running different games. Like for me, Free League system, I ran a Alien RPG campaign, and that game is all about atmosphere, and there are so many ways to die in that game, outside of an alien face hugging you or whatever. And so it's all about the details, and that comes into play in an encounter, whether it's a combat encounter or a role-playing encounter, is setting the atmosphere. Because like Brian, like you said, especially in combat, when you start getting up to the more experienced players, and you're going to still want to do some of this even with kids, I think, to get them kind of like thinking outside of their little world of their character sheet. But if you're in the Arctic, in the middle of a fight, and maybe you're fighting on a frozen lake, how will fighting on ice change everything, slipping and sliding? And if someone uses a dash action, and then you say, well, make an acrobatics check to see if you don't slip and fall, and they slip and fall, is inertia going to carry them further? Like, how far do you want to take this out? So the terrain that you fight on should make a big difference when you set up your encounter, and hopefully you do incorporate those extras. Because if you have stripped an encounter down to the enemies and allies, you're leaving out so much that can make an encounter interesting. And that, my dog's playing with her toy. You hear that? So
your dog's having a combat encounter? Or?
Yes, she got free toys from Camp Bow Wow. And,
oh, that's cute.
So she's enjoying her time with her toy. But in any case, I almost forgot to mention, one of my favorite places to get inspired from, in particular, with riddles. I like using riddles. I don't use them very often, because if you use too many riddles, it just gets tedious. But I really like the Exeter Book of Riddles. It is, now here's the thing, I have to qualify this, because the Exeter Book of Riddles, not like some of the solutions have never been discovered. Like, there's a riddle and no one knows what the answer is, right? Because some of the riddles are just like way over their head. But a lot of times, like if you read there are scholars out there who venture guesses, and you can say, yeah, I could see that. But what I've done in the past is taken the riddles out of the book and reworked them to kind of like bring the language to the 21st century, and make it maybe a little bit easier, because some of them are downright baffling, But history, I think, can offer incredible inspiration, at least for me. I love history, so so for me, that's a place I find history. And when I design encounters, particularly, one of the things I like to do, because it's really hard in D&D to run mass encounters, like armies fighting each other. But what you can do is you can script 99% of the battle.
True.
But you can have this, what I oftentimes do is put everything on a timer. So I'll say, okay, I had one encounter where the party was supposed to hold a bridge. The city was being attacked, and all they had to do was hold the bridge. And then I had all these weird things, like maybe a catapult or a ballista is brought up. Well, what are they going to do to defeat that, right? And if it takes them X number of rounds to defeat this ballista or catapult, it may not, even though this little section of the combat has nothing to do with what's happening on the other side of the city, the effectiveness of the party essentially dictate how poorly or how well the battle around the rest of the cities goes. So if the party takes too long to defeat their challenges, things are going awry all around them, you know. And so you can unfold a whole ton of description, like say, oh well, you see that Lieutenant Jones is, his line is collapsing, and the rest of the party is like, well, our line is collapsing, you know. So you can kind of create very exciting and stressful situations for your party, by kind of unbeknownst to them putting them on kind of a timer, or just simply gauging how things are going for them, you know. But if we turn up the volume now, do you, to an experienced group of party members, Brian, do you have like a favorite memorable encounter that you have?
Yeah, so actually, I would say the one that is most memorable from a combat encounter, there is a game store near us called Luck Factory Games. They're the largest board game cafe in North Carolina, and they have a D&D night every Wednesday night. And there's typically 6 or 7 DMs hosting and DMing, you know, for players, because there's like 50 players that show up. So we had an epic D&D night, and it's all within their homebrew canon world. I was invited to come DM, and a green dragon, ancient green dragon by the name of Bezos, you know, shows up. And just, you know, long story short, it was everyone at the table, and there was like 7, 8 different tables playing and participating in this combat encounter. So I had the chance of, you know, kind of hosting a festival games until the dragon Bezos came, and then it was on, and we had combat for 3 or 4 hours, and it was based on a timer. So after like every 30 minutes, depending on how many enemies passed a certain point, the population would dwindle down. And we had a dry erase board with the number of townsfolk and the population, and basically like every 30 minutes, this is how many people are left, this is how many people are left, so on and so forth. And my players were really great because we had one guy who was brand new to D&D. This was his second time ever playing D&D, but he's played other games before, and they all work so well with one another. And they figured out, oh, if we hold the line, we're going to, and the combat encounter I was running were gnolls, right? Very like pack mentality, you could say, but really just creatures that aren't that difficult to fight. But they learned, you know, the players were like, oh, I'm going to hold this line here, I'm going to, you know, do this, and that. They did so many awesome things thinking outside the box, because, you know, what we had stated earlier, they communicated with each other. They had spoken about, this is what my character can do. Pep mentioned it, and it's probably one of the best combat encounters as a dungeon master that I've run. There's a couple of ones that I think of as a player that I've participated in, but that could be another time.
Pepperina, do you have one that was memorable for you?
I think the biggest scale encounter that I've been in, and you were just mentioning like a big scale war. So this was in Evermore. This wasn't this past Easter, but the Easter before that. We had a big war. One of the PCs killed 2 million people in PCs. Yeah. And it caused the whole world to band together and go to a war. I, at the time, was fairly new to this world, and I didn't even know this PC that caused this war at the time. But we all had like this big war meeting beforehand, and everybody called everybody and all of our resources, and
The
server was insane.
Yeah.
And we played, I think it went on for 2 weekends.
Yes.
This war, and there was several groups, and we planned out, you're going to go to this part of the city, you're going to go to this part of the city, you're going to go to this part of the city and do this and do this and do this. I think we lost 6 players that weekend.
Yes. No, 7.
Was it 7?
Yeah, we lost 7.
Yeah. One of them was my husband, who I had to kill in a PvP session, because he was actually, while we were all looking at this PC who we thought caused the war, he was possessed by the real BBEG, and nobody knew it. I knew it as his wife, but I couldn't metagame it. So my character didn't know it. And it ended up, I had to go in a one-on-one PvP match against my husband, and everybody else was off doing their own things. So it was just the 2 of us in this session. We had a lot of spectators, but it was just the 2 of us. And it was such a memorable encounter. I won in 1 round. He didn't even get a hit on. I mean, we were 1 point off in initiative. I won by 1 point and went in and just obliterated him. But it was the first session ever that I've cried. Ever. That was, and since then I've cried so many times in Evermore, because it gets real.
It gets but
that's real. Like, I think I've cried in sessions with Brian.
The thing is, it's like, I feel that, you know, on the topic of encounters, you mentioned it, Matt, where there's, you know, I think oftentimes newer dungeon masters, and I mean newer in the sense of like not have played often, nor have they DM'd often, right? They think of an encounter as, oh, it's combat. But a role play encounter is probably just as devastating, because you're having, you know, I remember that moment where Pep and Chad's characters had this interaction, and it was emotionally draining, right?
And it wasn't just that he's my personal husband, but in the game, it was my character's oldest friend.
Yeah.
And he was there for my biggest traumatic event in my character's life. He helped save me in that instance and got me out of there alive. So there was a lot there between the characters, that she didn't want to do this, but she knew that he had become something that she couldn't let continue, as he tried to summon the, you know, big bad of the whole world. So it's, while that one was combat, we did fight. The real memorable part of the encounter was just the interactions and the connections that our characters had that brought us to that. If it was anybody else, I wouldn't have cried. I wouldn't have cared that I had to kill them.
Yeah.
But it was our DM knowing that these 2 characters were so connected that it had to be them. So nobody else could have done it.
Did Ray talk to you in advance and say, you know, or did he just let it unfold?
He just lets things unfold.
I laugh because like, and Pep knows this. Ray is the type of DM where his catchphrase is, "I just work here."
Just work here.
And it's partially true. Because, and I say this with all love, because he orchestrates things in the regards of like, planning the session and doing this and doing that, like, yes. But he also just lets things happen. I mean, the world's been going on for almost 30 years now. if not already 30 years. And yeah, I think it's been 30 years. And there are things that are happening in the world because like that same battle that was happening, my character was, and I did not say anything about this to the other players, like while everyone's like strategizing, myself and two other characters, Mervin and Rio, we have another plan, which is take the general Tigrit, who is this giant, and basically convert him, like cleanse him of the possession that he had, and make him whole, because Tigrit is Rio's father. So there's all these things happening, and I think you as a dungeon master or a game master, however you want to identify, have to do this. You have to set the foundation and then let people build upon it. Pep couldn't have that moment with Chad, or rather their characters couldn't have that moment together if Ray didn't set up that role play encounter, right? If he didn't lay down that foundation for it, how could this have happened? So I think, and actually I would like to ask this question to both of you. Where do you think you lay that foundation down? Like, where do you set that up so that you can have the epic combat or the epic role play, or a really good, or just even a really good role play or a combat encounter? Where do you set that foundation?
It has to be gradual over time. It has to be lots and lots and lots of little, like, sprinkling in seasoning. You're cooking this 5-course meal, and you put in a little seasoning, and you taste it, it's not quite right, and and all the way through the 5-course meal, you gotta hit all these notes, right? And inside of each of those notes, you're constantly seasoning and trying to get it all right? Like, for example, my current campaign, I have a street urchin NPC who I had decided early on was going to be kind of the crux of the campaign, in that there's a cult of Tharizdun is trying to release the mad god, break his chains. He's the chain god. They want to break him free. And famously, Tharizdun's avatar is a child. It takes the form of a child. And of course, there's nothing creepier than evil little kids, right? Just evil little kids.
Or dolls, right, Brian?
Yeah, evil dolls.
Evil dolls. We got a lot of evil dolls going on.
So when the cult, there were certain prophesized circumstances that had to take place for the right child to be chosen. They had to be born on a certain date, under a certain moon sign. And I had already said, okay, I'm in my mind, this kid is going to be those two things, but that's not enough. There's like a book that they had to read from, and then there's this crystal skull that had essentially the power of the avatar imprisoned within, and they had to be willingly brought. The kid has to willingly go to this temple. So there was like all these little pieces and parts, and I had no idea how I wanted to get it all together, but I know there was a priest that carried this book that the kid had to read from, and I was like, the party's not going to be able to help themselves. I'm going to have, the priest is going to willingly, they're not going to know it, but he's going to willingly let them kill him. And they're going to take this book, and they're not going to know what to do with it, so they're going to keep it. And one of the features of this little urchin that they know all along, she's a little kleptomaniac. She steals everything. She gets into everything. So sure enough, they kill this priest. They take the book, and they're like, okay, I got this book. I don't know what to do with it, so let's just carry it with us. Kid steals it, starts reading in it, and that first one's checked off. They steal the little crystal skull, and they decide, well, we're going to go crush this cult right now. We're going to go into the temple. And so they willingly go into the temple, and this kid goes with them. And the crystal skull shatters. They manage to shatter it. And so the power of this avatar goes into the kid. Well, this kid has been with the party, 25 sessions, 25 Sundays were the 5-hour sessions. And so we have this one player who's a pediatrician, and her role, now that this kid is infected, they've got kind of this mentor who's like, you're going to need to know if this kid is too far gone, whether you're going to be able to save her through love or the sword. And she's just like almost in tears right there, I just can't do it. It's like, well, that's your role. She's like this big half-orc barbarian. And of course, as the pediatrician in real life, she's spent the last 25 sessions buddying up to this kid and spending all the time with her. And, so the kid really trusts her character, because she spent all this time in her. And that's how she kind of got saddled with this, this burden, because she's the only one that the kid will really spend a lot of time with and let her get close. And now she's starting to get unhinged because she's got this power in her. And so that's an example of, almost half a year's worth of sessions, 100 hours of the gameplay or more. And it's only been here in the last 3 weeks that all of this has unfolded. But it took the first 20 to make it impactful and memorable and important. So that's kind of where I'm at on your question.
Yeah. Pep, what do you think about that? What do you think, whether as a DM or as a player, like, where do you think you set up that foundation to have those encounters?
I think a big part of it, and something that, Ray is very good with us and Evermore, is how many sessions have we had where he has sat back and not said a word for an hour?
A lot.
A lot. Because he just lets us go off on our tangents and our role plays and create these emotional connections with each other without forcing it forward.
True.
In a way, so our group is extremely close. Yeah. Because we have spent so much time together talking to each other, whether we have a combat in that session or not, we are getting closer as a group. We are trusting each other more. We all have each other's back. Like, I know your group's supposed to have each other's back, but like, we do. There is not a single person in our group that would, like, if one of us is in trouble, that wouldn't rush over there and save up. And put ourselves in danger, which we've all done so many times.
I mean, you saved my life, my character's life. Like, I mean, that session where I may or may not have been on vacation, but I jumped in.
So did you think a party is always supposed to have each other's back?
Not always, and not always in this world do they have each other's back. There's plenty of backstabbing and things going on behind the scenes, and players are allowed to be the BBEG in this world.
But it's also torn relationships I've seen sometimes. Like, it's also like, I know people who don't play anymore because of what it did, or they took a big break, and it's like, it's kind of this, you have to, this is a grain of salt. And as dungeon masters, it's like, not, and again, in this, I think everyone knows, like, this game's really like, this is like adult rating game. Like, there are adult topics here. I mean, but I can't, there are a lot of adult topics.
Especially in our group.
Yes, indeed. you know, my wife caught me flirting with Ray,
Yeah.
you know, DM character, you know, because Dane's got to do what Dane's got to do. But
we were trying to find an error.
Yeah, Dane's got to have an error, so you know.
Find an error or make an error.
Well, yeah.
Make an error.
It'd
It'd be like that sometimes.
But yeah, like I feel like in a lot of the games that I play where I have the most memorable encounters, a lot of that is very character driven. It's very much based on my very most memorable encounters are because of who I'm with. It's not necessarily the monster I'm fighting, even if there is a monster. It's the connection I have with the people at the table. And I think as a DM, it's important to not always drive your story forward and sit back and let your players build that naturally. You don't have to be the person saying all the words all the time. You can sit back and just let your players build those connections with each other. And in the long run, they'll have more memorable encounters and more emotion behind things because their characters are actually connected to the people and the characters at that table. And it's not just a guy I met in a tavern. Now this is my best friend. We've been through things.
True.
You've seen shit.
We've seen shit. We have seen some shit.
We have really seen some shit. Disturbing things.
Oh, yes.
So if you have a memorable combat encounter that had some unique quality to it that that you really had to think outside of the box to overcome. So for example, I don't get to play very often, but I've been told by my players I had one encounter where they were fighting a coven of hags, and they were fighting at this tree that was hollowed out, and there were all these layers to the tree, and at the very top of the tree was the matron of the hag coven, and the hag coven had a flock of harpies that aided them. But this tree where they had to fight this matron is 100 feet off the ground, and the harpies are circling the tree, singing. And so party members are walking off the side of the limbs of the trees and just plummeting, you know. And then the hag herself is on a nightmare flying around. But there was something at the top of the tree that she needed to protect, so she couldn't just stay up. She had to actually come down at some point or defend it. But they were fighting in a swamp, and so I cut the amount of falling damage in half because there's a splat factor at the bottom, you know. Mm-hmm. And so there were party members taking this nosedive and then having to spend, you know, several rounds running up the stairs of the tree on the interior of the tree to get back to the top, only to have to like fight off the harpies again. So that's kind of like a little something my party members always call me a dick for. You know, so do you have something with a little twist like that? Oh, and I forgot to mention that there was this huge bog beast at the bottom of it, kind of patrolling the bottom. So when they splattered to the ground, they had to quick scramble to get away from that thing too.
Pep, you want to go first?
I think it wasn't environmental. It was my character based. My character is a monk / druid, and she has this special ability where I can touch my forehead on other creatures, and I can pass memories, emotions, thoughts to and from. So that's one of her like special abilities. I believe it's a tiefling ability in the world, and I got it because I was taught by a tiefling, and it was passed down to me. I'm a gnome. So we're up against the big bad. Her name is Moon, and it's all the like high level characters of the world, because in this world, not everybody's the same level. You start at 1, you work your way up, or you die and you start over. So it's all of us, and we're trying to figure out how to, like, she's taken no damage. You can't hit her, you can't touch her. And I remember I have a watch that tells my heartbeat. So I have this idea, and I look at my watch and my heartbeat's at like 130, because like, I'm like, this is either going to be amazing,
it's intense,
or I'm going to die right now. Like, this is it. It's either it's that it's gonna work or it's gonna fail horribly. And I rush at her and I jump up and I touch my forehead to her, and like, I convey all these thoughts of forgiveness and love, and her like main motives are her daughters and protecting them. So I'm like giving her images of them as babies, and you know how much love she had with her husband at the time when they made their daughters, and all these things. And she pulls me back and she says, I've already forgiven myself for what I'm about to do to you. And she casts Disintegrate, holding me. And like, my heart almost exploded.
Yeah.
But that's a dex save, and I'm a monk, and I just turned level 7, and I made it, and I took 0 damage, and I lived to tell the tale. And I don't know how, but that was like my most memorable combat encounter. Was with, I should have died 3 times in that whole fight, and I didn't take any damage. I don't know how, but
that line is crushing. I've already forgiven myself for what I'm going to do to you. Yes, that is wonderful.
Yeah, that's Ray for that's Evermore.
I think that's the only combat encounter that has like actually gotten my heart pumping like that. Like, I had a physical reaction to it. This is either gonna be amazing, or I'm gonna die right now. Like, I just am, and I have to accept that at this moment.
Yeah, that was like legendary combat encounter. That's not even like normal. That's not even epic. That's like legendary, because I remember hearing that and was like, oh damn, like this is not good. But no,
so
as
it turned out she had a mask on that blocked my ability, that I didn't realize did that. That's why it didn't work on her.
Right.
Yeah.
Forgot about that. I would say for myself as a dungeon master, it was with my lovable buffoons, where they were like, let's, you know what, there's this vampire lord who has been, you know, parading around as this duke of Garceau, which is a homebrew area in my world. And you know, elves and half elves in my homebrew campaign, they're light, like Legolas in the Lord of the Rings. Like, they're light. They don't weigh a lot. So it was their idea to basically fastball special the half elf warlock to the vampire, because they stabbed the vampire in the heart, so it couldn't, you know, they couldn't regenerate, couldn't turn into he was just trying to run. So on a strength, I had them roll athletics with advantage. Nat 20. Okay, cool. Then I say, okay, because now you picked them up, now you're going to throw. So strength check. Another nat 20. And I'm like, this is impossible. This is mathematically impossible, because I'm a stats and probability guy. Like, I got my MBA in that. Like, I know the math. And I'm like, this is impossible. What the hell? And they're not loaded. I know these dice aren't loaded because these guys like just took my dice, my dice. They took it and said, because I don't have any. So I said, okay. The warlock rolls another nat freaking 20. So 3 nat 20s in a row. It's mathematically just at this point, my brain's melted. But we were all screaming and hollering and just going insane, because he cast, I think it was like Eldritch Blast or something like that. And he like did enough damage where the vampire was at, like, it killed him. So it was just an epic moment, buffoonery, like true buffoonery, that turned epic. And I've shared it so many times, and I love that story because it was, like you said, it was one of those moments where it was so unique, so special. Like we were going crazy, like our faces are red because we're laughing. We're crying because we're laughing so much. And that's what D&D's about, like those memorable moments.
Mm-hmm.
One of my most memorable dice roll moments was on the flip side. I actually have an Instagram post. It's probably several years back at this point, but when someone rolls a natural one, whether it's for, you know, an athletics check or, you know, or whatever, you know, attack roll, I always say, all right, roll again. And if they roll low, I usually have some sort of fumble. Well, he rolled another natural one. And I'm like, oh, all right. So that's when you're, you know, wringing your hands together. And I remember he was trying to do some athletics rolls where he was trying to, I think he was trying to shove a particular enemy down a hallway. Instead, he fell on his face. And it was an adult game, but there was another party member who always wore a kilt in the traditional style, you know, just commando style. And the guy, I was like, all right, you rolled 2 ones, just roll one more time. He rolled another one. He rolled 3 ones in a row. So I had him like on his back, his weapon had kind of skidded away from him, and he's laying there. And I'm like, all right, you've lost, you're done, you've collapsed. And so then this other player comes running, and I'm like, all right, you roll for your athletics. He wanted to jump over him to like get to the enemy, and he rolled a natural one. And I'm like,
my gosh.
oh my. So that was 4 natural ones in a row. And I'm like thinking to myself, all right, so this guy tried to leap into the enemy. Instead, he rolled a natural one. He's got this kilt on with no underwear. So he lands on his companion's face. And it wasn't my idea. Somebody else yelled it out. He totally squatted on his face. And I'm like, everyone's laughing. I'm like, all right, he totally landed on the dude's face, you know. And the great thing was it was a dwarf, so it was just like, you know, it's like this just ball of hair basically.
Yep.
With a kilt on. But yeah, that was 4 natural ones in a row.
God.
One of those things. And I remember I have some video of it, and I've got some but you'd have to scroll way back in my Instagram feed. It's probably, you know, 1,000 posts back there somewhere, but
yeah.
It's there somewhere.
I do have a story about like a fail that turned into something really interesting. So you had mentioned before that you do a lot of new players. So in our home games, we have 3 home groups that my husband DMs. I'm in all of them. And most of the time, they're new players when we start these groups. We'll have 1 or 2 that have played, and myself to kind of help these new players to teach them the game, because it's always friends and stuff that you know, come to us and say, I really want to learn how to play. And like our first group had like 8 players, and we're like, we gotta branch these off. We can't keep adding people. So in our second group, there was one of our warlock, and it was like 2nd or 3rd session, which he is a more advanced player, but everybody else in the group is new. And he died twice in that session. And my husband didn't want to kill him because we're just starting out. We're just teaching these, you know, new players, and he didn't want to quite teach them the death of a character just yet.
Yeah.
So instead, as a warlock, he took his patron away. And he had to find a new patron. So that was several months ago. Cut to, I think, 2 sessions ago. We are in a dungeon, and we are in this watery area, and a kraken comes and attacks us. And it's not looking good for us. And this warlock calls out to his old patron. It's written in his backstory, which the DM had forgot about because he read it months and months ago. He got his first patron by his whole village being attacked by a kraken, and he called out to whoever would listen to escape. And his patron answered and said, I'll get you out of here. You just have to do what I say. And that's how he got the original patron. So we're being attacked by a kraken, and he's lost this patron already. And he calls out to him again and says, I need you to do what you did before. And he pops up and he says, okay, but it's going to cost all of you. And he pops us out of there. And that's how we ended the session. We had no clue where we were. Cut to the next session. We're on a pirate ship. And we don't know why. And like throughout this session, we find out we are on a ship inside of a bottle, is where his patron has put us. But my husband had none of that planned at all. He did not know that the whole Kraken situation had happened, that that's how he originally got his patron, that he would call out to him. Like, he was expecting us to go in a completely different situation. But because of just the events and the roles and him losing his patron and dying months ago, had all led up to this one thing that now is taking our campaign into a completely different area of the world and route and section, and really just turned the whole campaign on its head.
Damn.
Well, it's funny because he had an opportunity to think about it for a week, which is great. You know,
yeah, he was like, I have to figure out where I'm sending you guys now. Like, that changed everything. So yeah, he had to definitely rework his whole plan for us.
That's interesting. So I have I just remembered another combat encounter that I made some players very upset over, and that was in the heart of a volcano. A mind flare had its lair, and my favorite stooges I like to put with mind flares, thralls I think they're called, are Umber Hulks, a pair of Umber Hulks. And you know, mind flares, they're psionic blast. It's an intelligence saving throw, which not a lot of people, unless you're a wizard, you probably don't have a real high intelligence or even proficiency in the saving throw. So that's tough enough as it is. The Umber Hulk saving throw for its gaze is a charisma saving throw. And then you have, on top of that, you're going to have, if you want to make the Mind Flare a spellcaster, they have innate spellcasting like Dominate Person, which is a wisdom save. And, you know, but if you want to make them like a sorcerer or something, you can hit an enormous array of different saves. So while this person might be good at intelligence, they may not be good at the wisdom for the Dominate Person. I mean, it's just like you could just nail them at a number of different levels, right? The toy is back. But I placing it in a volcano, you have also the element of, you know, that charisma save from the Umber Hulk's confusing glare. One of the effects is you just run in a random direction as fast as you can. And I had players running off the edge into the lava. And there were
That's dirty, man.
There were players who were having to grapple their allies to stop them from going. So their entire, instead of fighting, they had to like tackle their allies from before they could go into the lava. And that was a pretty brutal encounter, but they won. They did pull it out, so I got kudos to them. But it was a close thing. And I did have a player go into the lava and die.
Oof.
Yeah.
Do a golem, you know, with the hand.
Yeah.
Or not Terminator 2 with the thumbs up.
Yeah. Yes, not Terminator 2. It's probably like the middle finger, more like. UDM. All right, guys. This was very interesting because we went off on a lot of different tangents. The anecdotes, I think, are just as valuable as any kind of basic discussion and adventure or encounter design, because I think we'll revisit this. I think this was one that Malcolm really wanted to talk about, which I was surprised he wasn't able to make it. We're sad, I should say, because he's a very busy individual. But we'll probably come back to this again. So think up, and what we could do is have every DM sit down and design an original encounter that they can unveil at the session. So it might be fun because we could share the screen and you could show maps or whatever you put together. It'd be interesting. But I really want to thank you guys for coming on. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed having you on, Pepperina. I really hope that you come back a lot more, because we have always interested in more perspectives, whether it's players or TMs or from a completely different game system, which you're right, it's very valuable. And Brian, as always, very, very good to have you on. And
thank you, sir.
To do this again with you guys. So,
appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I will let the War Mistress take us away.
If you like what we do here on the channel, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell, because it really helps us out.